Welcome to The Making of Man, the premier podcast for Catholic men called to the married life. My name is Matthew Rodriguez, and in this episode, I'm joined by Charlie Lyden. We'll discuss the importance of Catholic communities, the duty of parents to keep their kids in church, the modern Catholic dating scene, and much more. Enjoy. Welcome, Charlie. Thank you for hopping on The Making of Man.
Happy to be here.
I was thinking we could start off and you could just share a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, absolutely. Grew up mainly in Connecticut, Southeast Connecticut. Youngest of three kids, mom and dad, both Catholic, raised Catholic, cradle Catholic. Went up through the church, um, received all the sacraments, altar served, Eucharistic minister, etc. Received a lot of the sacraments with my friends, but I was one of the main ones that actually was going to church as I was growing up, especially after confirmation. A lot of friends kind of went to CCD, sometimes went to church, and then as soon as the obligation was gone, or as soon as they reached high school, kind of dropped off immediately. Yeah, grew up in a small town, so knew a lot of people in my church and in school, which was actually quite nice. There's, maybe 40 people in my grade, and 20 of us received the sacraments together,
Nice.
but again, then most people dropped off, so it's kind of this interesting, you know um I don't know, a lot of friends I have that background but don't necessarily practice. Growing up, went through public school, which was kind of the other interesting thing, is to have that many people who happened to be religious, but we all went to public school. um yeah, my dad was basically the mayor of my town growing up. My mom was a
Very cool.
substitute teacher. So between the two of them, my dad knew all the adults, my mom knew all the kids. So, and we lived in a town of about 4,000 people. So, I by default knew everyone, or at least everyone knew me, which was kind of a fun, small town, kind of homey feel. And yeah, just a lot of good people. It was a more rural area, so it was a little bit more working class, but not necessarily. We kind of had a range of people, um, for Connecticut. So, yeah, but public school all the way through, but was always Catholic and always practicing, and always meant something to me. It wasn't just something my parents wanted me to do. Like, I'd say the rosary going to bed sometimes. I'd, like like I had an interior life. I was praying, somewhat regularly, but it was always kind of like its own thing off to the side. It did impact how I behaved, but it was not something I ever talked about in school because it was public school, and I don't know, you just don't talk about that sort of stuff. Plus, it's like you're a kid, so it's like it's something you do because your parents have you do it, and it's kind of yours, but you're a kid, so nothing's really yours. You're just kind of, shuttled along until you eventually get dropped off at college, and then you're like,
Yeah.
oh, this is where my life, this is where things start
Yes.
for me. This is
Yes.
where I start making decisions, and no one's going to tell me yes or no, or when to be home by or whatever. So, um, yeah. Also, because it was a rural area, I didn't have a car. It's also like I wasn't like going out a ton in high school, so I didn't really have any of that, as much independence or kind of whatever as some kids might have in a city or whatever. But yeah. So, um, I'd say I'd say basically by the grace of God ended up going to Catholic University. Um, and it was one of those things where at the time it was like I knew going into it, it's like, yeah, this is meant to be, like even before I stepped foot there. Um, so yeah, my first pick was well, my goal was to get as far away from Connecticut as I could. That was my goal. My parents' goal was that I hopefully end up in a Catholic school, you know, or have to end up in a Catholic school, so that I keep the faith, or I have a better shot at keeping it.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and
Catholic U was a good middle road for you
it
too.
was it was a good. It was
Yeah.
There was one that was farther on my list, and so my number one pick for a little bit was the University of Hawaii. Um, very, very, very far. We have family there. There's kind of a family history there, so it made a little bit more sense. But just a 12-hour plane ride on an island in the a little bit too far for them. Um, even with kind of our backstory there. So DC was the good middle ground, far enough away, can take the Amtrak down, or whatever. And so, and it was one of those things where we toured the basilica, back when I was in like eighth grade or something. And then we kind of looked around and we're like, oh, there's a school here. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But so we kind of came upon it when I was like in eighth grade before I knew or thought anything about college, etc. I don't know what my parents weren't thinking. I don't know if it was a happy accident by my mom or it was like actually like but we have like pictures of me when I'm at Catholic University when I'm like 13, which is kind of funny to see. So yeah, so remembered it from then, applied there. Um, I don't know. Well, this is public information. I was gonna say I don't know if Catholic U wants this advertised. They have a 78% acceptance rate, so it was like a safety school. There was no,
Sure.
you know, all for the Catholic faith there, all for the community, good academics, but not hard to get into.
Hmm.
Yeah, so ended up going there, um, and that was very impactful in a lot of different ways for me. I mean, the first biggest thing is that it kept me in the faith, practicing the faith. I didn't really have any lapse, which I understand is more rare, but it was I it was in part due to me. The circumstances definitely helped, um, and so it was just a good combination. But I mean, I remember freshman year. I remember friends asking me before who knew I was religious. They're like, "Are you still gonna keep going to church when you go to college?" And I'm like, "I guess I haven't even thought about that. Like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about?" Like, And then college comes and starts to become a reality. But um, I made enough friends that were practicing that were you know, and they like were much more, not that I wasn't, but they grew up in Catholic schools. They knew stuff, they're much more akin to being in the Catholic community with people their age that are practicing and stuff like that. So it made it seamless where it wasn't just religious, it was also social and it was like every aspect of life, these people were my friends. So I go to class with them, I hang out with them, we also go to mass together. It's just normal. It's not like these different buckets. And that's one of the nicest things I think about that university or those types of universities. So yeah, grew in a number of ways there. Um, Received the sacraments more. Took theology classes for the first time. Because I had public school before. Got very much into service. So I hadn't really done a lot of hands-on service before. So a lot of growing in good ways. A lot of good friends, connections made along the way. Had the chance to study abroad, be in Rome for a semester, which was cool.
Very cool. Did you
Yeah.
get to go to the Vatican?
Yep. Vatican. All four major basilicas there. A lot of a lot of sightseeing in Rome, in Italy, outside on the weekends. So it was cool. It's definitely very much different change of pace. So that was you know it sounds like it's a dream, but there are like adjustments and some difficulties there in the practicality of it. But very much a blessing there. And then yeah, senior year, COVID year, but was still doing a lot with like campus ministry. which was kind of a redeeming factor. And then, yeah, graduated. I said, did my master's, bounced around Virginia for about a month or for about a year, doing odd jobs, still practicing, but kind of lost the Catholic community. I mean, still going to church, but like kind of lost that. And then one way or another, kind of realized it was better for me job wise, socially, to come back to DC. Came back, already had some of the built in friends, got more involved in church communities, and I've kind of just been riding it and building it since. So, uh,
It's awesome.
yeah, there's the, I don't know however long that was, the 5 minute overview or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
No, I appreciate
yeah,
it. No, thank you for sharing. And there's so much in there that's really cool. One of the themes that you kind of touched on was just the community that you were able to have at various places. And
yeah,
from my conversation with guys, that just seems so crucial.
yeah,
There's the saying that no one becomes a saint alone. And I feel like we say that, it's kind of like this kind of banal thing. But then when you see it like actually in people's lives of like, oh, of course that makes sense that I'm going to be willing to go to, these community events more if I actually have people that I want to see there. And just it makes you way more involved and engaged.
right.
If I can ask, I'm curious about in middle school, though, you mentioned that, or when you were confirmed and when you kind of finished going through CCD, that you kind of stayed, but a lot of your friends kind of stopped going. And I'm curious about like at that moment, do you remember a specific reason, or was there a kind of why did you stay kind of with the faith um, when maybe some of your friends and peers were not as involved?
Um, well, I'll say this, and this is exactly what my parents would say: you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
You're living under our roof.
Okay.
You're going.
Yeah.
And and I think that was there. And for me, it was good. I never had a huge rebellion phase, um, in that regard. It's one of the, obviously it's, I got to wake up early or whatever, but it's like, whatever. I had to wake up at like 5:30 on a school day. So waking up at like 7:30 on a weekend's not actually that hard. But, so that was it. But, and to my parents' point, the other parents weren't doing that.
Mhm.
A high schooler and that was living under their roof. They weren't an adult yet. You're 13, whatever. You're in a rebel phase. You can bring them to church. They're not an adult yet. Like, if this is actually important to you and your family, and it's not just checking boxes, and so I feel like that is kind of telling. Like,
Mhm.
I would do the same if I was in my parents' shoes. Okay, kids, you're living under my roof. You're coming to church. If you graduate and then decide not to, sure. Um, Now there might still be strings attached if I'm paying for your college. I'm doing other stuff when you graduated, so like it's not. But anyways, that was kind of that. I didn't rebel, but I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
So
Well, no, but I think there's a lot of benefit to that. Um, all the literature that I've read on kind of parenting and especially kind of how to keep your kids in the faith. Yeah, I mean, that's almost to be expected. And in today's day and age, there is value in viewing like the agency of your child for sure. But there are certain things that you don't need to expect them to have, kind of all the answers for. And faith is kind of one of them where it does take a little bit to kind of really take root. And so, like you mentioned, you have the authority and the right and the duty. I mean, really, in a
right,
sense, or in, yeah, you have the duty to make sure your kids are going to mass. I often wonder, if we really take mass to be like the source and summit of our faith, and you tell your kids from like birth onwards of like this hour is the most important hour of the week for your mother and I. I'm just curious, like I wonder what that would change like within a family. If it's like every other hour that we do, it's not as important as this one. I can't help but believe that kids would be more uh kind of they would be more active if they knew how much their parents cared for it.
right. Well, and to your point of community before, And example, right? You talk about guys looking for example from other guys. I mean, that's the first place where all of it happens is the family. So
Hmm.
that's the first community. If you're a boy, your first example for a man is your father. Your girl, the first example for a woman is your mother. And that's probably still like the most impactful one you have, most of your life, for better or for worse. And so, we can't choose our parents, obviously, but like, um, that plays, I mean, that's kind of the biggest thing. And so, like, you know, I knew both my parents took the faith seriously. I think that's important. I think when it's one and one, then it's like, oh, if dad doesn't like it as much, and I'll just be like dad, like, or if it's split, and one doesn't go at all, or having a united front where it's both equally important. And it's not like, if both people go, I think it's good. When both people are strong, it's much better. Uh, because kids can tell too when one of the parents is the heavyweight and the other one is always being dragged along. And like, okay, good, both of you, got your butts in the pews, but like, you know, and also it is. I mean, the man, like, there's a responsibility on both parts, but I think it's especially, I think it's, yeah, it's a neglect of duty when the man lets his wife be the one who takes the faith seriously, and he's just kind of along for the ride. Like,
Yeah.
that's not, it's better than nothing, but like, it's, and some people
Yes.
don't have anything, but, in various degrees, but it's still not like in an ideal world or in practice. Like it's it's not good enough. Sorry, that's
Right.
not good enough.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
yeah, and it's not a competition, but both people have to take it seriously, and it can't be one went along for the ride and the other one is in the driver's seat all the time. Like
Yeah.
that just can't be it. So
Well, and it's really interesting that you bring that up. That's actually been a large portion of kind of my thinking for myself as I'm now engaged, and so I'm looking to be married later this year, and imagining, what that will be like being a husband and being a father, and doing kind of research into what is expected of husbands and fathers. I think we almost have this way of taking the family, like the thematic, or the themes of the family out of like the themes of the church. Where like the themes of the church, it makes sense that like you have the Pope as the head, and he kind of dictates what happens kind of like in the church, and to a certain degree kind of orders it. And then you have bishops which order their dioceses, and then you have priests which order their parishes. But then we just kind of remove the family element, out of that next step, which the next step would be the father that orders the family. That is kind of like the next cascading waterfall down.
all right,
And that can be a hard thing to recognize as a man if you're not already as engaged as maybe you should be. But one, I would say if you're not as already engaged as you should, then you can start doing that today.
sure,
Um, but then too, like, I, from what I've read and all that, there are consequences to not being as engaged as you should. One of the things that I enjoyed learning about was after the fall, if you look to like who God goes to, there's this terrifying but also beautiful line where it said, God called to the man, where are you? Right? Like it was Eve that might have eaten the fruit first. Like we can talk all about that, but like when kind of there was an account that had to be given,
hmm
God came to Adam and he's like, I gave you this garden, I set you over it to protect it, and what happened? So I think there's a lot of truth in kind of what you said about, just the father bringing the family to the church and making sure, you know, people, like you said, that kids can tell that he's not a lightweight. I think that is very important.
yeah, yeah. Oh, it's the domestic church, right? That's the domestic
Mm-hmm.
church. That's where and you talk about even like CCD and religious ed and stuff like that. It's like okay, you can send your kids to these, and that's good. Like, please do. But they got to be learning this stuff at home too. They got to be seeing it at home. Should be praying together, whether it's the rosary or saying grace before meals or something, some combination of it. It can't be. It can be the most important hour of the week, but it can't be the only hour of the week. You know.
True.
So,
True.
you
True. Very true.
um, and yeah. So, and I think for me, I like looking back, and this is what I think it's what we're all supposed to do. Is I think it's really cool seeing how someone's faith and like seeing your parents' faith and how that impacts how they go about living in the world, and especially their
Mhm.
job and stuff like that. Um, I don't know. I getting more into the workforce, getting like all this sort of stuff. It's like, yeah, like there's a there's more to learn. I think from I feel like at least from my parents, like seeing what they did and now understanding being in those shoes a little bit more. And obviously it increases over time. Like, you're gonna get married soon, you're gonna, have kids one day. Like, and I'm sure for everyone as you progress through those stages, you kind of understand how your parents did things a little bit more. But so yeah, it's I don't really know where I was going with that, but um, I don't know. We learn a lot from our families, I think.
Yes.
You know,
Well, and like you said, they're the first community too. So there's just,
so,
the way that you treat others in a huge degree is going to be based on how you were kind of raised. Um,
right.
so no, that's great. And then so you get to college, you have that departure from the roof of your parents, and
Right.
then was it just like the community that kind of kept you in the faith, or was there other factors involved in that?
Um, yeah, I mean, I still remember. It's funny, like I kind of remember the play by play, the highlight reel, kind of what kept me. Um, it was largely the community. The first month or so, I was still adjusting, getting used to classes, getting used to doing my laundry, whatever else. Um, we had a freshman retreat, which is the big thing they always plug the beginning of the year, about 1 month in. Um, I had made friends in different areas along the way, but what that retreat was good for was for fully putting the responsibility on me. Um, and kind of the last question they asked, I still remember this. It was like, okay, when you get back from this retreat, what are you going to do outside of going to mass on Sunday to kind of improve your spiritual life? And I was like, oh, I've never thought about that. Like literally never thought about that. But it was after that retreat, I started going to daily mass at least once a week, and then I think it spiraled into like maybe 3 times a week or something. Kind of, got outside my comfort zone and started doing more service, more outreach with homeless, which is something I hadn't done before. So there's some growth there. And then it was through service, I grew a lot in the faith. Probably made some of my closer friends. Um, and then things just kind of continued to build from there. But that was mainly my linchpin. Is that helped me get more into service, and service was what I like because I like being hands on. I feel like as a guy, we like to do stuff. So it was like, this is something I can do. It's helpful. Um, and lots of good, for me, it was once I got more comfortable talking with people out on the streets, it was like, okay, if I can make conversation here, pretty, now I'm making conversation with anyone and everyone. Like it's so there were a lot of benefits there, and just a lot of kind of, I think, hidden graces, and again, got more into theology and started learning that backside of it too, which I think is very important. I think we're supposed to kind of have all of these things in a certain degree. We're supposed to constantly be learning about the faith, but if you fall into the intellectual bucket and you don't do anything, well, you're not. All you are is a scholar. You're not actually living the faith. It it's kind of a whole thing, and likewise, if all you do is hands-on stuff and you're you're Martha versus Mary, and you're barely praying, and okay, good, you got a piece of it, but you don't have all of it. So it's kind of like that whole picture, um, which is what I really liked. I'd say I found a little bit more of the service stuff. Like I'm at least for where I'm at currently with my life, I've gotten that more integrated again. But like the ready to go like theology classes where you can just show up like once or twice a week, listen to, and we had good teachers, whoever talk about the virtues or even philosophy, but I like theology a little bit more, or read whatever. Like having that, I think, is very important, and we have it a little bit, I think, but it's and I think part of the challenge of finding that outside of in church rather than in school is people come from varying backgrounds of knowledge, and so you can go to church Bible study now. Those are you can find that anywhere, but are we learning like Father Mike Schmitz, like like I feel like there's like there's the introductory levels, are we and not to say that it has to be some like random Catholic brand, like it doesn't it can be actually picking up a good book and reading it, but it's like at what level are we reading this? And a lot of times you will get I don't know, it's just hard to find that right level because you find the very surface level stuff that's easy, accessible to everyone. That's great to get people in the door. And then sometimes you find these like super niche intellectual stuff and you're like, okay, cool, but like, you know, um, do I really need to know what like the platonic form of like, whatever is like, do I need to,
Yeah.
use 4 syllable words that nobody else has heard just to kind of, you know, all four intellectual rabbit holes. Um, but like, where's the middle ground? And I think
Hmm.
there is some, and maybe some of that is in conversation. Maybe some of that is, um, you know, but at least for me, that's kind of I'm somewhere in the middle ground, and I think that's important to have. I think it's important to keep receiving that formation or theology. It's just kind of I don't know. At least for me, I've noticed it's a little bit more challenging to find the exact kind of thing outside of the university context.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not going to cough up 2K a month to go back to class, when I
Yeah.
already have my degree and now I'm the one paying for it. So,
Right. Right.
but
Yeah. But
yeah,
I mean, you mentioned a lot of good resources. Like, I
yeah,
think with the app like Hallow,
right,
there are so many places that you can go or so many people that you can listen to.
yeah,
And maybe you won't get the full gambit, but there are specific teachers that I find myself being more drawn to in the way that they present kind of what they're an expert on.
right,
And I think, like you mentioned, even if we start there and let our curiosity guide us to whatever else, we
right,
stumble into, you're still learning. It
right,
might not be a full kind of course in a college educational level,
right,
but I am thankful for things like YouTube and for Hallow that there is so many teachers. There are so many teachers that are able to kind of reach larger audiences.
right. Yeah, no, they're very good resources. I don't mean to knock them.
No, no, no. Yeah.
A lot of yeah, and I guess almost anecdotally, I think maybe that's one thing that I've started to notice. Maybe that's why I think a lot of ways people are attracted to the Thomistic Institute around here is helping to fill some of that void. Um, Obviously, you are getting one strain of theology. It is maybe the most important strain. I don't know. It's one of the most influential ones, but I think that need for like intellectual, but also having a teacher teach you something about the faith that you don't know and in person in some capacity is probably um, what's been behind a lot of the success of the Thomistic Institute. And I know it attracts a certain crowd, but it attracts a pretty big crowd of people who have heard a little bit, want to grow deeper in their knowledge, and maybe aren't quite, reading, I can't even think of a philosophy book off the top of my head, but reading stuff
Yeah.
on their own, reading
Right.
News Republic on their own or whatever, but
Right.
um, yeah. So, anyways, a little bit of an anecdote, but I think the appetite is there for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, and like I said, people can kind of thankfully be able to find stuff on the internet. Although, like you mentioned with the Tomistic Institute, it is nice to be in person or to have someone specifically that you can go to. And actually, I think that in person element is really important. You mentioned earlier, more related to the homeless ministry that you were doing, um, that kind of having that embeddedness or that hands on activity
Mhm.
can really help make the things that you learn about the faith, come alive in a really experiential way. There's a woman, her name is Mary Harrington, who she is not Catholic, but she does a lot of kind of social commentary on male and female kind of gender stuff. And she was on a podcast recently talking about how there's been like a masculinity crisis for the last 5 years. But then she was questioned because the host was predicting that there's going to be a crisis in femininity in the next 5 years. So we've kind of had this wave of masculine crisis, and he predicts that we're going to have this wave of feminine crisis. And she said something that I thought was really interesting, where she said she thought it was just a lack of human embeddedness, and this is how we're seeing it kind of split among kind of the genders, that what we've seen for the last kind of 5 years or decade for men is now kind of transferring to women. Of we kind of have this loss of community, we're more online, we're less actually face to face, in person kind of doing stuff. And so I think for us as the people of, you can call it the ultimate embeddedness of like the resurrection, like we are, our whole goal is to come back and to be engaged. I think it's truly so important for us to kind of start to do those things more and start to either build back community in one sense, or like you said, go out and actually kind of do those corporal acts of mercy to another person. um, so yeah, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about like the homeless ministry that you've done or still do, and how you got started with that and what that's been like.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's probably the most important or impactful thing I had at Catholic U. Um, in part because it helped me get into other things, but also in part because of itself. Um, yeah, I mean, just from I guess a bird's eye view, it's talking about before how we read, restudy, intellectual, which is the good first foundation, but at a certain point in time, we have to do something. Um, and obviously, like our faith is meant to impact like how we live our lives, like how we treat other people. But I think there's something nice about being so deliberate in like because like outreach to the homeless is very deliberate. It's not like, oh, okay, I'm gonna hold the door for somebody. It's like, okay, you know eh, I'm going out of my way. And it's also it's serving the poorest of the poor, which is, at least in our context, you know, the poorest in America is still more wealthy than people in other countries, but we're meant to be in our own place, and so serving the poor that's around us. Um, I think one is meant to show that we're all the same, that we're all equally important, we're all equally valuable. That I'm no better than another person. Um, it's meant to make us servant-hearted, which I think is, I mean, servant heart is meant to make us humble. It's humility, um, which I think is the key to all virtues. If pride is the root of all sin, then I would think humility is the root of all virtue. Um, humility, in tandem with love and all of these things, but um, because it's outwardly focused, it's not about us, and so I can do a tangible action that is um, spending 2 or 3 hours where none of the things I do is about me. Um, and it it's just I think it's just good because it starts to shift who you are, how you think, um, and that's what the church is about. That's what being, Christ was not about himself. He was about everyone else around him. Like you know, they say humility is what it's not thinking of yourself. It's not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's I'm thinking about other people around me, and obviously not in just a complete corporate or corporal like material way, but obviously that's the introduction into a conversation into a spiritual element. But yeah, it's ultimately just encountering someone, and I can find someone who looks nothing like me, who I have nothing in common with, and yet I can spend a half hour talking to them and showing them respect and showing them love and showing them in a very tangible way and others around that they're as valuable as me. That's I think it's important. And the humility and the sacrifice part of it is not only is that good for the faith, that's priming us for our vocation. Like that's and and I think this is one thing that I see, and it's yeah, it's I don't want to say I'm judgmental, but I see a lot of I don't like it when I see a lot of people our age like delay, expanding their youth longer than it has to be, and
Hmm.
delaying sacrifice and delaying vocation. Obviously, you want prudence and whatnot when you decide to enter a vocation or you happen to enter a vocation, but this idea that like I'm just going to waste my whole 20s on whatever I want and then I'll grow up when I'm 30, 35, whatever. I think it's selfish. I think it's obnoxious. I think I see it a lot. The whole like, dual income, no kids, that's less of a religious thing and it's more secular, but you see that where you're like, you know, I don't know. So I'm kind of spiraling off here, but um, we're meant to give of ourselves. We're meant, and if we're married, a husband's meant to give himself to his wife, and vice versa. If we're in a religious context, you give yourself to the church in a much more spiritual, mystical way. And so this idea of like us delaying our vocations longer, you know, it's self-seeking, and I think it's very common in society and in the city. And it's ultimately just prideful. It's just prideful, and people wanting to be kids longer than they have to be, or longer than they are. Um, I don't know. I could keep on ranting, but to bring it back a little bit, yeah, the service aspect, humility, outwardly focused, sacrifice, thinking of others makes us better Christians, Catholics, helps us prime us for our vocation, and that's
Yeah.
ultimately what we're called to do. And our vocation is just uh, in so many words a means to an end so that we get to heaven. So that's that's the long and short of it, I guess. But
Yeah. Um, no, I think we can definitely touch on like the discernment and extending of youth. That's definitely a very current problem.
yeah,
And yeah, I definitely have seen that a lot. And one of the things that I've experienced myself or and hope to experience once I'm married, there's an interesting dichotomy. And I used to be in a men's group in Chicago, and we talk about this a lot, where kind of the perpetual discerner thinks that they have more options than they will when they become, whatever their vocation is.
yep,
And in some regards, they kind of do because they can choose any vocation, right? Once you choose the vocation, you can't do any of the others. But there's so many more things that you can do, like once you choose a vocation. Like when you're discerning, you can't be the conduit that God uses to come and, transform wine into the blood of Christ, right? Or bread into the Eucharist. If you go through seminary and become a priest, then you can be. Like that is a
right,
crazy reality that you just don't have access to when you're just, kind of sitting at the doors of vocation, as it were, and not really picking one. Same
Right.
thing with marriage. You with God's assistance or you assisting God, you make a child. Like you make a new being that wasn't here before. And
Yeah.
if you really kind of take on the church's priorities, you realize that there's nothing else in this world that is immortal, right?
Hmm.
No matter what we do for our job, every business has a 100% mortality rate. Every state has a 100% mortality rate. There's been no state that's just existed forever. But we believe that every human soul will exist forever. And it has one of two destinations that it will eventually go to. And so if you look at it that way, I think that helps put a lot of things into perspective of, wow, like, if I'm called to marriage, then the having of this child and the raising of this child in a way that's going to, direct it towards heaven
Hmm.
is far and away the most important thing that I can do with my life.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that, and I was a discerner as well. Like I do understand that it can be, um, you can get very apprehensive about kind of making that choice. And there's a lot of, what does God want me to do? That seems like a very weighty question. It is a very weighty question. It's important to kind of put your time in and do it well. But the rewards on the other side of discernment
Hmm.
far outweigh, kind of the benefits that you can get kind of before you choose a vocation. And so I hope that more people our age are waking up to that. But I totally agree with your analysis of that as well.
Yeah. It's analysis paralysis, right? Or the paradox of
Mm-hmm.
choice. So many options. Yeah, but you're gonna have to make one.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to make one. So, do you want to make that one now, or do you want to wait 10 years? You
Mm-hmm.
know, and I don't know. I think this is factual. Hopefully, it's not controversial. But for me, I'm a guy. I don't have a biological clock. I would think if I'm a woman and I want to have X amount of kids, or want a bigger family or whatever, maybe you know. And I get there's different factors, but I I think physically there's a little bit more of a crunch, and so I don't know. I think about those things, but of course, most of the time, today's society, you know, God forbid you say anything like that, because as a man, you're telling a woman what to do with the body. Okay, okay, I get it. But you know, if it were me, but anyways, it's not me. So
Yeah.
men don't have. I feel like men don't have as much of a time crunch, but physically. But the general principle of let's not just artificially extend our youth, delay responsibility, see how long I can be a child for before I actually have to sacrifice. And but also to the point of I mean, you mentioned vocation with priesthood or with marriage, but with marriage, it's no person is going to be perfect. No, so if you're waiting around for Mr. or Mrs. Right, right, that ain't going to happen. And what's going to happen is you're going to wait another 5 years or so until eventually you come around to the idea. Now you're 5 years older and you decided to do the same thing, which is marry the next good person that you find available. That's on board. And so it's this idea we have more options than we really do.
Mhm.
We have options, but we have to make one. And quite frankly, it's childish to keep on avoiding responsibility and
Mhm.
thinking that because we wait long is going to be you know a better decision, or something better will come around. Eh, Not really. Like something will come around, but and what's really happening is you're coming around to that idea. So anyways, I think um it's I don't like to see it in society. I don't like to see
Yeah.
it. and especially in the church too, because I think some of this stuff comes from feminism. I think some of it comes from other places. But you see a lot of these things still trickle into people who are in the church. Like some of the, and people might not be cognizant of it, but these behaviors, you know, are because we live in society, impacts everyone. And if people aren't aware of it, so I don't know. It's for me, it's been on my mind a little bit more too, where I'm like, I really see and respect people who get married younger and start having kids. I very much respect them, and I try and I don't want to judge people who are older and don't, but I feel like it I don't know. If it's for a lack of trying and if it's intentional, that's just neglecting your vocation. Like that's just neglecting responsibility, and it's irresponsible to the person. Writ large, it's irresponsible to society. Like we go from a macro level, we start looking at like why do you think developed nations all have like declining birth rates? We can't even have a replacement. We need to have this wackadoo immigration policy just to make sure that we're like getting enough people in that we have our demographics still look okay for our country. Um, and people obviously don't think about these things that much, but that has a big impact on our society, our economy, we rely upon for our way of life. So all of these things are in tandem. But um, yeah, I mean, at a personal level, there's micro and there's macro implications. But um, at a personal level, it's just a neglection of responsibility, and it's also like you wait around and things are not gonna change that much. You're just gonna have to you're just gonna get a little bit older and then realize that these are my options, and and then live with them. And that's what people do. People, um, people mature, but it's not helpful for society to give people permission to neglect responsibility, um, and to advertise and make it appealing or normal or whatever to um, to not have kids, to get married when you're 35 or what. Like it's again not passing judgment for someone who has some story and had to come back to it, but for people that are in the know and are just neglecting responsibility, yeah, that's on you. Own that. Like that's the whole point, is responsibility. So
Well,
um,
and you mentioned, I think a important point with this, especially for men, is because you mentioned women that just with the biological clock
yeah,
often feel more pressure on this. And
right,
that's definitely been true in my experience. I have a number of female friends who have been trying to find someone
yeah,
and they do feel that pressure. And one of the things that I've seen is honestly just the men aren't where we need to be. I think in this kind of topic, and again with very broad strokes,
right,
but I think that a lot of Catholic women are more on the path that we're kind of talking about just
mhm,
because of that biological factor.
yeah,
It's easier for a guy to be like, okay, I'll just take 10 years off and then start looking. But if everyone in that age bracket takes 10 years off, every guy, then the women that are in that age bracket are left kind of without anybody to go and find someone. And so I think that is something that Catholic guys can definitely, kind of like think about, that it's like you were saying on like the macro level, there are kind of ripples and consequences to our actions. And I've seen a lot of women who really want to start a family
yeah,
and there just haven't really been guys there that they can do that with. So I definitely agree that there are a lot of guys that kind of need to learn about this first and foremost, and then kind of act on it. And all this is also with the caveat of discerning God's will, like we said before,
Right.
that, sometimes it's not the time for you, to get married. Like I'm thinking of the saints, uh, the parents of Therese of Lisieux, that I believe her dad was pretty old by the time that they got married.
Mm.
But both of them had tried, both her parents had tried to join religious orders, and they had kind of discerned out of that. So they were doing their discernment.
Right.
And so I think that just as long as you're kind of going through discernment kind of courageously, kind of like taking the next steps, just kind of putting your weight behind your actions,
Yeah.
you can know that you're doing your duty. But if you're a guy that's out there and you don't feel like you're doing that, and you maybe are trying not to do that, then I would highly encourage you to, first and foremost, take that to prayer.
Right.
But then secondly, just really try and kind of see what's stopping you, and learn about what you can gain by picking a vocation and going into it.
Right. Yeah. No, I completely agree, and especially just kind of a podcast for guys. Yes, men, start start taking responsibility.
Yes.
And I mean, yeah, obviously on both parts, but not going to play this game where guys sit around and say, "Oh, women need to do better." And then you have some women's podcast over here. Oh, guys need to do better. We both have our jobs to do,
Yes.
and you know we're only in control of ourselves. But if we are talking macro, yes, macro, yeah, room for improvement, plenty.
Yeah.
I'll say anecdotally, and I don't know. I'm curious. This is my anecdotal experience from what I've seen around here. Because you said, I don't know if you said women come around earlier or they just realize it earlier, but this is, and I could be completely off base here, but from what I've seen around here, uh, I I'm 24, so when I go to different places, most I will sometimes see guys my age. The youngest girls or women that I typically meet are like 28, 29. And so anecdotally, I'm a little bit like, where is everyone those like 5 years out of college? Um, and so I'm not saying that's everywhere. I'm not saying that's other places, but a part of me wonders, okay, like, are women coming around 28, 29, and men have already kind of like zoned out, realized there's no one around, and like are going to come around when they're 30, 35? Is that what's
Right.
happening? Um, Maybe, you know, I could, embrace you know, embrace Joe Rogan podcast and just kind of completely spitball and make claims left and right of, what's actually going on here. That's actually what's happening in all of society. But
Yeah.
I'll be a little bit more rationed and say I don't know.
I
But,
appreciate that.
um, but part of me wonders about stuff like that. And there is no
Yeah.
way of knowing. And obviously it's different in different circumstances. But I would think what would be nice is, again, nobody wastes any time. You get out of college, you don't take 5 years off to find yourself, or 10 years off to find yourself, or climb some sort of corporate ladder. I mean, if you're a guy, okay, this is maybe, I don't want to, but I feel like as a guy, if I want to provide a single income for my household, it makes a lot of sense for me to climb that corporate ladder, whatever, get that money as much as I can. If I'm a woman, yes, I want to make money for myself, but I don't feel like it makes as much sense to climb some big corporate ladder, knowing that in 5, 10 years I'd like to be a mom and work less or not work at all. So I think that's not too much of a hot take. But but yeah, so right out of college, it's like, all right, we shouldn't be. Let's not monkey around. Let's not do 10 years of running marathons and doing spin cycle and or soul cycle and taking my yoga class and you know I don't know. trying every coffee shop around here and whatever. Okay, sure. Do a few of those things, have fun with it, have your Saturday brunches, whatever. But like, let's also still, you know, actually try to pursue a vocation right out of college. It's not like college and then, oh, it's no, like, can we be 22, 23, 24 men and women going to church, trying to, pursue a vocation? Not saying that there aren't, but can we all do that rather than coming back around later? Um,
Yeah.
so, anyways,
Yeah.
there's
Well, no,
me.
and I think it's definitely a symptom of just like the times
Right,
that this is what we're facing, and I agree with you that it isn't one side looking down the other or the other side looking down on the other. Both sides can improve, and from my experience talking to a lot of people, unfortunately, the thing that does draw them back or get them more engaged or into the game is, kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of God allowing them to experience some deficiency in some way, right? They have some hardship, they hit something, because really I do have a lot of empathy for people that fall into the Instagram culture and they fall into the I'm supposed to go to all the bar classes and I'm supposed to as a guy just kind of travel and take these Instagram photos, like whatever your kind of whatever the mainstream culture has persuaded you to do.
right,
But then the issue with that is that all those people that are doing that are of a certain um, social kind of like bracket, and also they're all around like similar ages. And so as soon as you get out of either of those two things, you realize like, oh, I can't keep doing that anymore. And like you were saying, then hopefully you can still kind of get back in the game and do it. And I think that the more people that have that experience and share that experience, the more people that are younger can look up at that and be like, oh, I'm just not going to fall into that, right? Like it actually turns out, you know, this whole church thing might be the way to go.
right.
um, and just stick with the church and stay with it. So I'm hopeful that what we'll see in the next coming years is people get a little bit disenchanted with the Instagram life because they see that it doesn't last forever. It doesn't provide everyone with the benefits that it provides the top of the top of the top users of Instagram, or I'm just harping on that, social media in general. Um, and kind of come back to recognize like the heroic in the normal, that actually doing the common things, getting married, having kids, being consistent in how much you go to church, praying the rosary every day. Like these things aren't easy. That was a realization that I like definitely had, where you look at kind of like these older people in mass or whatever that have been doing this consistently for decades, and having that mental image of them switch from like at this kind of old boring person that's always here to like, this is like a trooper, like
Yeah,
this person has just been with it for years. And
yeah,
again, if we have that level of priorities kind of shift, I think we can start to change our behaviors in that way as well, of actually, having kids and doing all this stuff. It's messy, but it's rewarding, and it's difficult, and it, kind of does all that. But it, at the end of the day, I think it is, um, heroic to do that. And so the more people that recognize, I think, the heroic and the common, the
right.
more people that I think we can get to change their behaviors to do that a little bit more, to kind of like you said, do the vocational discernment a little bit quicker.
I agree. And it goes, yeah, I guess to go back to more of your original point, just the examples that we see around us, people we surround ourselves with. We,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the phrase is, we become the five people we surround ourselves with most. So we're, if Instagram is one of those people and Netflix is a second person and whatever, yeah, we're going to be living in a fantasy world here. But
Right.
yeah, no, for sure. I agree.
Yeah. Well, with that, we can wrap this conversation up. I want to thank you so much for hopping on. So, like you said, this podcast, the goal is to try and get testimonies and role models and stuff out onto YouTube and onto the internet so that we can create more of that Catholic culture that we're looking for, where people are more courageous in their discernment and kind of can feel more confident creating communities. So, thank you. And with that, we can end this. Thank you for watching The Making of Man. If you liked that episode, please click here for more, and remember to like and subscribe.